Hey guys, it's your host Trooper, and thank you so much for joining me again for another true crime episode. And if it's your first time here, then welcome to the squad. Today's episode is very, very thought provoking, I would say. It is regarding the disappearance of a young 21-year-old student who went missing and still to this day, we have no idea what happened. It is an unsolved mystery. It is still an active, ongoing investigation currently in New Hampshire with the FBI. But there are a lot of different theories that are surrounding this case. So I'm really interested to see what you guys think is the more logical theory or what you guys believe might have happened to her. I am going to go more into detail. There's four specific theories, and I will also touch base on what theories we think law enforcement is actually going to cover. So without further ado, let's get into it. So today we're going to be discussing about the crazy disappearance regarding Maura Murray, who disappeared on the evening of February 9, 2004, after her car crashed on Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. So Maura was born on May 4th, 1982 in Hanson, Massachusetts, and she was the fourth of five children born to her parents, Fred and Lori Murray. And she was raised as like a close-knit family with a background in like Irish Catholic values. Now, her parents divorced when she was young, but they both remained involved in her life. She was known for being incredibly intelligent. I mean, like academically gifted. She was very, very talented when it came to athletics and sports, and she was very ambitious. In high school, she excelled academically and was a standout athlete on the track and cross country teams. So in 1996, she began attending the Whitman Hanson Regional High School. In her freshman year, she actually started point guard on the varsity basketball team and was a strong softball pitcher. She also set the freshman 3K record at the Catholic Memorial Invitational there. Now, between 1997 and 1998, she quits all of her other sports, and that's when she really starts focusing on track and cross country. She becomes a standout distance runner and breaks multiple school records. And like I said before, she was known as academically gifted and highly organized. So I want you guys to put like a little pin in this quote right here that she was highly organized, because this plays a factor later. So we're going to put a little pin in that. So on July 28th, 1999, she has a used Saturn sedan, which was originally purchased probably a few years back, likely by her dad. And in the year 2000, she graduated from high school. She was ranked fourth in her class. She had an SAT score of 1420, which is a lot more than what I could probably get. She won district in the mile, and she was also co-captain of the track team. She also won a $400 award at her graduation, and she was actually recruited by Harvard, but she chose to go to the U.S. Military Academy, West Point. And she got accepted into West Point. And actually, the senator at the time, Edward Kennedy, wrote her recommendation to West Point. So that's freaking awesome. So fall 2000, she enrolls at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, majoring in chemical engineering, where she also ran track and often saw her sister Julie there, who was also a cadet. Now, in August of 2001, she was accused of shoplifting. It was like a very, very small amount, but she was accused of shoplifting at the Fort Knox PX during summer training there. And she did face a cadet honor hearing, but I honestly could not find more information. I'm surrounding that little bit. But it kind of ties in a little bit to what we're going into when it comes to key details about her disappearance and what happened. So moving forward, in fall 2001, this is when she meets and begins dating her boyfriend, Bill, who is introduced by her sister, Julie, and they both meet at West Point. And by December 1st, 2001, they attend the Army-Navy football game in Philadelphia with Bill and actually meet some of his family. Now, everything seems to be going well during their relationship, because in the summer of 01 and 02, they spend a few weeks together each summer with his family in Ohio. Now, just to kind of give you guys a little bit more context regarding their relationship. So they began dating at West Point in 2001, and they had kind of like a long distance relationship, because between 2002 and 2003 was when both Maura and Bill eventually left West Point, but they continued dating. And by 2003, Bill was serving in the U.S. Army as a lieutenant and was stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And Maura at the time was a nursing student at UMass Amherst. Now, January 2nd of 2002 is when Maura actually withdraws from West Point and transfers to the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Now, it's not exactly determined or verified why she exactly left. There's multiple speculations, but of course, I don't want to misread anything. I don't want to give any false information, so I'm not going to go too deep into them, but just know that she withdraws from West Point, the military academy, and she transfers to the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Now, Maura started her college education at West Point, where she studied chemical engineering for only 3 semesters. Then she transferred to UMass Amherst, majoring in nursing. So she changed her majors, possibly maybe having struggles at West Point or just a desire just to change courses. People can do that. That's totally fine. Nothing is wrong with that. At UMass, she was a good student there and she held a job as a part-time campus security officer. And despite her bright future, Maura had some personal struggles leading up to her disappearance. So in October 20th of 2003, there was a credit card incident at UMass Amherst that Maura was involved in. And ultimately, it became known that it was a credit card fraud incident there. So basically, someone realized that their card was being used for some food orders and was able to trace it back to Maura's dorm room there. And the officer that was on the scene files a report on November 3rd of 2003. And a court hearing was scheduled for December 16th, 2003 at 12 p.m. at the Amherst District Court. Now, it is said that all of this was going to be dismissed because she didn't really have like a criminal history. She wasn't a bad kid at all, didn't get really into any trouble. So it was said that the charge was going to be dismissed as long as she stayed out of trouble between that time frame, between the time that she got charged and was notified about it to the court hearing. So as long as she was fine, everything was going to be dismissed. So December 16th is, kind of like the end of the semester and like the holiday season. So around 12 p.m., Maura was scheduled to appear in court at noon regarding the credit card charge. To this day, I don't 100% know a lot of information regarding that. For some reason, I just wasn't able to find it. I don't know if I was not looking in the right spots. I'm assuming it got dismissed, but she still might have had some mental stress about it. So after that, there was some events and some details leading up to her disappearance that plays a huge part in the whole reason why we think she disappeared. So Thursday, February 5th, 2004 at 7 p.m., Maura starts her shift as a campus security officer. And a few minutes after that, around 7:17, Maura is speaking with her boyfriend, Billy, for approximately 20 minutes, according to cell phone records. There was about 2 additional short calls that were placed between them two later that evening. And around 10:10 p.m., Maura spoke on the phone with her older sister, Kathleen. Now, this also is speculation as well. It's not 100% verified of what exactly it was detailing. Some say it might have been Kathleen's relationship issues because she was an alcoholic at the time and her fiance, as soon as she got out of rehab, took her to a liquor store and then she had relapsed. That could be it. I know that there was something said along those lines years later, but we're still not 100% sure about what the details of the phone call happened. But whatever the details were, it was regarding her older sister, Kathleen. And later that night, Maura became so visibly upset during her shift. She was just kind of like mentally checked out. Like she was just kind of like staring off into space. She had to be escorted back to her dorm room by her supervisor. She was just out of it, not having it. And of course, after that, the next day, her family and friends described her as like very distant, kind of in distress a little bit. Like she just didn't seem quite like herself. So on Saturday 7, 2004, around 12:30, Maura's father, Fred, visited Amherst to assist her in car shopping. And that evening, she borrowed her father's car to attend a dorm party, which is kind of typical, college days. Nothing is wrong with that. And Sunday, February 8th, 2004. So this is early that night. So she goes to the dorm party, and then early in the morning, so about 2:30 a.m., she left the party, according to one of her friends. And around 3:30 a.m., while returning to her father's motel, Maura actually got into a minor car accident, causing damage to his vehicle. And the police were dispatched just a few minutes later, and it's stated that at 4:11 a.m. is when the police report showed that it was cleared, and there wasn't too much that they can do, just some damage. The tow truck leaves Maura around 4:30 a.m. and then drops Maura at the Quality Inn around 4:45 a.m. Now, during the car accident, Maura actually struck a guardrail in Massachusetts on Route 9 in Hadley, causing nearly $10,000 worth of damage, which back in the day isn't that much, but nowadays it would be worth a lot more. And again, this is her father's car. And the responding officer wrote an accident report, but there was no documentation of any field sobriety tests being conducted. And Maura was driven back to her father's motel and stayed in his room the rest of the morning. At 4:49 a.m., there was a cell phone call placed to her boyfriend from her dad's phone, but the participants, who was actually on the phone, and the content of the phone call still remain unknown. February 8th, she appears quiet and withdrawn, and she doesn't tell anyone about the crash. She starts to appear more distressed to family and friends. So later that morning, her dad learned that the damage to the vehicle would be covered by his auto insurance, which is a blessing. And he rented a car, dropped Maura off at UMass Amherst back at school, and departed for Connecticut. At 11:30 that night, Fred called his daughter to remind her to obtain accident forms from the Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles. They agreed to talk again Monday night to discuss the forms and fill out the insurance claim via phone. Morning of February 9th is when Maura actually starts searching for lodging in New Hampshire and Vermont. And she emails the professor about a false family death. And I want to say false family death because she wrote an email to not only her school professor, but also her work supervisor, stating that she had to go away for 1 week because there was a death in the family. But there was no death in the family. So we're going to put another pin in this one, guys. And I'm going to bring this back up later on, part of the theories, but I don't know. It's just really, really weird that you would email someone. I mean, there's times where, I guess coworkers, in my past, lied and say yeah, I'm sick, but you're not really sick. You're just calling out of work. You need a mental day or something. But it was confirmed by other family members and friends that there actually was no family death. So that plays a whole nother logical part into this, or a mental part into this, as to why she would lie about something like this. Now, if she wanted to just go away for a week, then okay, that's sure right. No one is holding a gun to your head saying you can't leave for a week. But it was very, very strange, the fact that she had to lie about a false family death just to get away for a week. So early that morning, at 3:32 a.m., Maura emails a homework assignment to her nursing cohort and is titled Maternity Clinical Definitions. Now, this is also strange to me, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later. So another pin in this one, but Maura emails a homework assignment right before she disappears. So this is actually going to play into one of the theories that I 75% believe. I don't want to say I 100% believe it, because all the clues, all the evidence, it just points to different directions, guys, and we'll get into that later. So later that morning, early afternoon, about 12:55 p.m., she calls a condo owner in New Hampshire, but no reservation is made. And at 1 p.m., she emails her boyfriend, Bill, in kind of an affectionate tone, saying that, she really didn't feel like talking to anyone, but that she was going to call Bill later. And the subject line actually said, "Hey, hey." And this is their last known communication that was documented. At 1:13 p.m., she calls a fellow student to return some borrowed clothes and drop them off. And around 1:24 is when exactly she emails the professors claiming that she'll be away for a week due to a death in the family, which was untrue. So she continues to go on some tourism lines and she's looking some stuff up, but no bookings or reservations were made. So that's why we're not 100% sure where her intent was going with going up north, going away for a week. And around 2:18 p.m., she attempts to call her boyfriend again, but he doesn't answer. So by mid-afternoon, around 3:15 p.m., she withdraws $280, which is nearly all of her funds, from an ATM of Bank of America in Hadley, Massachusetts. And the surveillance shows that she's alone. So if you guys are listening here and not actually viewing the video of my podcast episode right now, it shows that she's by herself. Now, to me, if you're looking at this picture, she might seem not like herself, maybe, compared to other photos that I've seen her in. She looks a little mentally worn down, under distress, something, but she just doesn't seem like herself. She just seems like maybe she's really just going through it. Around 3:43 p.m., she buys some alcohol at Liquors 44. She buys some Kahlua, vodka, Baileys, and some Smirnoff Ice, I believe. And she also buys a box of wine. And it's said that she returns some of the bottles for a small refund. But later on, when they do find her vehicle, they do see the wine actually in the vehicle. Approximately 4 p.m., she picks up the accident report forms from the Hadley police station related to the prior car crash related to her dad's car. And these are later found in her vehicle after her disappearance. At 4:37 p.m., she had the last recorded phone call and checks her voicemail. So between 3:40 and 4:30 p.m. is when she starts leaving UMass Amherst campus in her black 1996 Saturn heading north. And she leaves campus with some packed belongings, alcohol, and cash that she had withdrawn earlier that day. And she had also searched for directions to Vermont and lodging in the White Mountains. So kind of like a little summary of this route. The path is consistent with her MapQuest searches for the White Mountains and Burlington and stuff like that. That was up near Vermont. It's also consistent with the location of the crash. Maybe she was heading towards that way and crashed, but of course, we're going to get into this a little bit later. So now it's time to actually get into the details surrounding the crash. So that evening, around 7:27 p.m., is when a local resident, Faith Westman, calls 911 to report a car off the road on Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. She mentions seeing a person at the scene, and another witness reported seeing a man smoking a cigarette, though this remains disputed. And shortly after 7:27 p.m., the school bus driver, Butch Atwood, who lives in the area and actually lives kind of across the way from where she crashed her vehicle, stops to check on Maura, and she appears shaken, but she's uninjured. She declines help and she claims that she already called AAA, but it's stated in some documents that she may have not even called AAA. And she declined police assistance, but he calls 911 anyway. Now, the original caller, Faith Westman, her house is directly overlooking the crash bed. Butch Atwood's house is kind of down the road to the east, but within walking distance. And at 7:46 p.m., the police arrive, but Maura is gone. Her car is locked, the airbags were deployed, and her personal belongings, including alcohol and accident forms, are inside. One of the things that really stood out was a rag was found stuffed in the tailpipe of her vehicle. Now, this is also a speculation. It was said that maybe her dad told her to put the rag in the tailpipe prior to this because she had, a loud exhaust and did not want her getting pulled over for this, but that's not 100% confirmed either. Now, by the time police reached the crash site within 10 to 15 minutes of the 911 call, Maura had vanished without a trace. And despite extensive searches, there were no confirmed sightings or physical evidence that have surfaced, and really none since. And later that night, there was bloodhounds tracking her scent briefly into the woods, and then they lost it near the road, suggesting that she may have entered another vehicle. So about 30 minutes after the police arrived, Officer Cecile Smith arrives, and the police reached the crash site roughly 7 to 10 minutes after that call. Maura's gone, nothing is really there. The initial scene assessment, so there's no footprints leading away from the car that are documented in the official report. Now, the conditions, there's darkness and stuff like that, because it's getting late at night. But she also crashed her car into a snowbank. So you would think, okay, if she got out and, around the vehicle or wandered off into the woods that was right there, that there would be some kind of footprints, but there was absolutely no footprints whatsoever. There was also the witness statements that were collected. So police spoke with the neighbors there, including the bus driver, Butch, who saw Maura and reported she appeared coherent but declined any help. So between 8 p.m. and midnight were the early search efforts. So there were bloodhounds deployed. They even had like a helicopter in the sky. Now, the dogs actually tracked her scent briefly into the woods and then lost it near the road, suggesting that she may have entered another vehicle. Officers knocked on doors along that route, asking residents if they saw anyone walking, but unfortunately, there were no confirmed sightings that ever emerged. There was also no signs of a struggle, so the scene shows no physical evidence of any altercation or injury. There wasn't like any blood splatters, no weapons, anything like that beyond the crash itself. So overnight between February 9th and February 10th, there were still no confirmed sightings. Despite the short time window between the crash and the police arrival, no resident reports seeing Maura walking or being picked up at this time. So eventually the car is towed and the investigation begins. So the Saturn is removed from the scene. Police initially treat the situation as just like a routine single vehicle accident with a missing driver. They don't treat this yet as a criminal matter until later on. So the morning of February 10, 2004, the family is notified. So Maura's father, Fred, calls her boyfriend, Bill, to tell him that Maura is missing and her car was found abandoned. Bill immediately leaves Oklahoma and flies over to New Hampshire to join her father and family and the police in the investigation. Now, there's some speculation as to what initially happened with Bill's actions after Maura disappeared. So we all know that Bill flew from Oklahoma to New Hampshire immediately to help with, the investigation. He later claimed he received a voicemail with whimpering sounds that he believed might have been Maura. Now, this claim has been debated heavily and is not verified, so still a speculation. Now, the only specific call from their phone records that appears in the search results within the case files is a 3-minute call from Bill to Maura's cell phone on the Saturday after her disappearance. Now, this detail appears in a discussion referencing a review of his phone records. Now, this call occurred while Bill was already in New Hampshire participating in the search. Now, we wanted to look deeply into why this call mattered, and it has been cited by some investigators and even some commentators as unusual because Maura's phone should have been inactive by then if something major happened. Now, there is no official explanation for the call, and there's no confirmation that the call even connected to her phone. But of course, there were more search efforts. The search actually spans the New Hampshire Fish and Game and the local police, and some volunteers begin a more organized search of the surrounding woods and the roads. Of course, there's still no physical evidence found despite extensive ground and air searches. There were still no footprints, clothing, belongings linked to Maura that are located outside of the vehicle. Now, from February 11th and 12th of 2004, there was a more intensified search. So they started a more larger, bigger search regarding her. This is actually one of the biggest search efforts in New Hampshire history, involving the grounds team, helicopters with thermal imaging, tracking dogs. They even got snowmobile units out because, like we said, it's in February, she hit a snowbank, so there's snow on the ground. But unfortunately, there is still no trace, and there is zero confirmed evidence of Maura's direction of travel or her physical condition at this point. Now, the first few weeks after her disappearance is when we start getting into some of the theories. Now, the one major theory that I want to get into is the voluntary disappearance theory. So police initially considered that Maura may have left intentionally, citing that her unannounced departure from UMass and some alcohol purchasing, and there was no sign of foul play at the scene. Now, of course, the family disputed this, saying, like the family argues that Maura would not have vanished willingly, and they really, really pushed for a criminal investigation, but there's still no verified sightings. Multiple reported sightings came in from New Hampshire and Vermont, but none are confirmed. So the window of when this investigation took place is very critical because the response time was extremely short between the crash and police arrival. There was no physical evidence indicating whether she walked away, was picked up, or left voluntarily. The search begins quickly, yet they found nothing, which is an unusual outcome for a rural roadside disappearance. And the scent trail ending at the road is one of the few concrete clues suggesting that she may have entered another vehicle. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about, and this has been in a lot of social media, I will say, regarding her case. Did her boyfriend Bill know more about Maura's plans? And some researchers and case followers believe Bill may have known Maura was planning to leave campus for a few days because there was a phone record analysis suggesting that he may have been aware she was leaving UMass on February 9th, but it hasn't been proven. But it is a recurring theme in investigative discussions throughout these years. What can be said for certain is that they were in a long distance relationship at the time of her disappearance, and Maura was emotionally distressed in the days leading up to February 9th, the day of her disappearance. We do know for sure that Bill was in Oklahoma until February 10th, which is the morning after, and then traveled to New Hampshire to help in the search efforts to find her. There's also that 3-minute call to Maura's phone the Saturday after she vanished that Bill made, which again comes off unusual to investigators and quite frankly comes off unusual to me just a little bit. I don't know, maybe he called just to see, like, maybe she would pick up, like, I don't know. There's no full phone records for either party that have been released from the government. And years later, Bill faced some serious allegations of violence and disturbing behavior towards another partner, which we will get into later. What is still unknown is whether their relationship was abusive while Maura was alive and they were together, whether their relationship contributed to her leaving campus, whether he had any involvement or knowledge of her disappearance, and how often they spoke in the days leading up to February 9th, the day of her disappearance, whether they argued or discussed her leaving UMass, whether Maura had called Bill on February 9th, and whether any calls between them were actually deleted or missing. Because again, this is the year 2004. So it's a lot different circumstances when it comes to like technology nowadays. So now I want to touch base on the major theories in the disappearance of Maura Murray. Now, there's 4 main theories that I want to discuss, but just to backtrack a little bit, ever since 2009 up until now, the case has been transferred to the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit, and the disappearance was reclassified as a suspicious missing person case. So the first main theory that I kind of believe what happened is the voluntary disappearance or the intentional walk away, new life, whatever you want to call it. So the core idea of this theory is that Maura may have left UMass intentionally, drove north, crashed, and then just chose to disappear on her own. The police initially considered the possibility of a voluntary disappearance given her unexplained trip and lack of immediate evidence of foul play, such as she left campus without telling anyone despite the trip being 2.5 hours away. She did email her professor and her work supervisor claiming a family emergency that did not exist. She withdrew nearly all of her cash and bought alcohol. And she had previously attended West Point and was comfortable in the outdoors. So, like I said, she was very organized. So, this is one of, the first pins I was talking about. She was very, very organized, but she was also part of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point for 3 whole semesters. And she was comfortable in the outdoors. So, it could have been that this was a voluntary disappearance. Now, some contradictions to that is that there was no confirmed sightings in over 20 years that she has been disappeared and has been missing. There was no financial, digital, or communication activity after February 9th of 2004. She left behind her phone, her ID, and most belongings were in her car at the scene of the crash. The terrain around the route is kind of harsh, so surviving long term without preparation is unlikely. So, investigators once considered this plausible, but the total absence of evidence since 2004 makes it increasingly unlikely. There is also the second theory, which is the accidental death in the woods. After the crash, Maura fled the scene to avoid police and maybe have succumbed to the elements, unfortunately. Some supporting points to this is that it was dark, it's winter, it's extremely cold, she may have been disoriented or injured, and the bloodhounds kind of tracked her scent briefly into the woods, but lost it. And now some contradictions to this is that extensive searches were done. Again, ground, air, cadaver dogs. They even did river searches and found no trace. The scent trail ended near the road, but not deeper into the woods. And the FBI and the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit now treated this case as suspicious and not accidental. So it could be possible, but the lack of evidence, or the lack of physical evidence, I should say, after massive searches weakens this theory a little bit. Theory number 3, she could have been picked up by a passing driver voluntarily or coerced or forced. So Maura left the crash scene and got into another vehicle, either willingly or under distress. So some supporting points to this theory is that her scent ended near the road, which is consistent with maybe entering another vehicle. And the crash site is on kind of like a rural road with occasional local traffic. And she told the bus driver that she had already called AAA, which was untrue, possibly signaling that she just wanted to be left alone until someone else arrived. And like we stated before, there were no footprints that were found leading deep into the woods. Some contradictions to this theory: there was no confirmed witness that saw her enter a vehicle, and no vehicle was ever identified. So this one is probably one of the most widely supported theories among investigators because it explains the total lack of physical evidence at the scene that investigators could not find. Now, the fourth and final theory that I want to get into is foul play by a local offender, maybe. So Maura maybe have encountered someone dangerous after leaving the crash site. And this is when the FBI now listed her case indicating like a potential criminal involvement. And the area has had unrelated violent offenders over the years, but also the timing, it being night on an isolated road and just being in a vulnerable situation created kind of that opportunity for this theory to be more plausible. Contradictions to this: like we said, there was no physical evidence of even a struggle at the scene, and there was no suspect ever being publicly identified from law enforcement. So this theory, it still remains active because it aligns with the FBI's current classification of it being suspicious and, having possible criminal involvement, but it is still a mystery as to how she disappeared. Investigators tend to have different priorities when it comes to these theories. Now, the first one, based on the FBI page, the first one that they think is that she might have been picked up by another vehicle. The second one being some foul play. The third one possibly being accidental death. And then the fourth one being a voluntary disappearance. So if I know my audience and my listeners the way that I think I know you guys, I have a feeling of which one you guys are going to choose. But of course, comment below. Definitely tell me which theory you guys think makes the most sense to her disappearance. And definitely let me know what you guys think. I'm curious to see, which theory you guys think happened and which one seems more logical to her disappearance. Now, I stated earlier that her boyfriend Bill had gotten into some criminal and legal trouble years later after her disappearance. Now, none of these charges are related to Maura, but it possibly could paint a picture into their relationship. It definitely shaped the public perception of their relationship after this happened. Now, again, she disappeared in the year 2004, but these allegations that surfaced about her boyfriend Bill was from 2019. So, Bill was indicted in 2019 for felony sex abuse in Washington, D.C., involving a coworker in 2011. Now, court statements allege a pattern of emotional and physical abuse in that later relationship, and that during sex, he would call the victim Maura and use degrading language referencing Maura. These allegations emerged years after Maura vanished, but they may have fueled speculation about his behavior and the nature of their relationship. So, getting into that little tidbit there, it makes me wonder what their relationship was and if Maura was actually trying to get away from Bill, maybe. I don't know. I have no idea. This is just my own opinion. It's hard to say. It really is. Now, I want to get into some overlooked details of the case. So, one of them referencing back to the muffler rag. So, when the car was cleared from the scene, a rag believed to have been part of Maura's emergency roadside kit was found stuffed tightly into the Saturn's muffler pipe. Now, the explanation behind this, now some suggest her father Fred had previously advised her to put it there to hide the car's excessive exhaust smoke so she wouldn't get pulled over. Now, others argued it would have stalled the engine or was placed there by someone else to actually disable the vehicle. The overlooked angle on this is that the physical effort required to stuff it in and the exact timing of when it was placed there remains an odd behavioral thing. That doesn't quite fit a standard single vehicle accident sequence. Another overlooked detail was in 2025, there was a fingerprint match. So there was a massive development occurred recently last year involving forensic evidence that has sat unexamined and unmatched for years. And I think we've all seen this when it comes to law enforcement and criminal cases. Forensic evidence just sitting on the shelves for years. And this was one of those things. So in March 2025, an unidentified fingerprint was found on a CD or a CD case inside Maura's abandoned Saturn, and it was matched to her ex-boyfriend Stefan. And Stefan and her dated very briefly at West Point. I honestly could not find any information regarding him other than the fact that they dated very briefly at West Point and then they broke up and then she went with Bill. Now, he was a classmate of Maura's at West Point. He also acted or reportedly acted as her student advocate during a disciplinary review board, possibly, what had happened prior, maybe like the credit card charge. We're not 100% sure. He was recently convicted of unrelated fraud and animal cruelty charges in Ohio. I don't know why all of these boyfriends and ex-boyfriends are just doing very, very horrible things later on in their lives. I don't know what's going on with that. Now, while he denied any involvement, the presence of his fingerprint inside her car, despite the relationship supposedly ending before she transferred to UMass Amherst, kind of suggests like a lingering connection or maybe some kind of physical cross-contamination of items that went unnoticed for nearly 2 decades. So it's hard to say. Now, also in her dorm room, when the campus police searched her room, they found her personal belongings packed neatly into boxes and the art removed from the walls. This kind of put everything into perspective for me as to why I chose the theory that I chose. Now, it remains unclear exactly when she packed up. Investigators initially assumed she did it right before leaving on Monday, but friends noted it could have been done earlier. But packing up an entire room goes beyond just a temporary week-long escape for a death in the family. It points towards something that was more premeditated, or like the intent to leave her life at UMass permanently, especially removing art from the walls. Like, there's such things as like, cleaning and like reorganizing, redecorating, spring cleaning. But removing art off the walls and having everything packed up, it just seems like her intent was to leave UMass Amherst permanently, which reframes her entire state of mind leading up to the drive and ultimately her disappearance. Now, despite extensive searches by law enforcement, volunteers, and even private groups, there are still no confirmed sightings or definitive leads that have emerged about her disappearance. Her disappearance has made international headlines, and they made her story one of the most followed missing person cases throughout the world. Her case has been featured on ABC's 2020 and the Oxygen Channel. Monta Williams even featured her, New York Daily News, and numerous other media news outlets. It actually became one of the first major crime mysteries that was amplified by early social media. Now, because of this, and other documentaries that have been featured, like there was the 2017 Oxygen documentary series about it. It continues to fuel extensive online discussions from like amateur investigators, and her family strongly believes that she was the victim of foul play, which is a view they have reiterated in interviews and in a 2024 podcast series. And her sister Julie is a huge public advocate for her sister's disappearance. She has become one of the most prominent voices fighting for transparency, accountability, and continued investigative efforts in Maura's case. Julie has stepped into the public spotlight to advocate for her sister and push back against any misinformation about the case. She emphasizes like the human side of the case, reminding the public that Maura was not just a mystery, but also a daughter, sister, and a friend. She is also the founding member of a statewide advocacy group, using her platform to push for change. The advocacy group is the New Hampshire Coalition of Families of the Missing and Murdered. So Maura's family, through Julie, is part of this major statewide advocacy organization whose loved ones are missing or victims of unsolved homicides. And it was formed because families faced years of silence, stalled investigations, and inconsistent communication from officials. And the whole reason why Julie joined, and these are her exact words: after 2 decades of roadblocks and silence, it became clear that families needed to stand together. Transparency and communication should not be something we have to beg for. And I 100% agree with her. They were demanding transparency, push for accountability, ensure sustained investigative efforts, and treat families as partners, not obstacles. And this coalition is now one of the strongest advocacy forces in New Hampshire for cold cases, including Maura's. Now, the official advocacy, the New Hampshire Department of Justice and the FBI, recently, a few years back, released an age progression photo of her that I have up on my screen right now, thinking that it may help generate some leads. And the officials emphasized collaboration with local, state, and federal partners, including the FBI, demonstrating that the state still considers Maura's disappearance suspicious and worthy of continued resources. There's also the public awareness and media advocacy for it. It is widely covered in documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reportings. Media attention helps maintain pressure on law enforcement and keeps the public engaged in her disappearance. And like I said before, this case is described as one of the earliest major crime mysteries amplified by online communities. And Julie Murray, her sister, frequently participates in interviews and podcasts to correct misinformation and to keep Maura's story alive. Now, unfortunately, as of 2026, Maura Murray still remains missing, and the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit continues to investigate, and the FBI has released the age-progressed image in hopes of generating new leads. So anyone with information about Maura Murray is asked to call the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit at 603-223-3676. 3648. That is 603-223-3648. Or you can also email them at coldcaseunit@dos.nh.gov. And to learn more about Maura and the ongoing efforts to find her and bring her home, you can visit their website, mauramurraymissing.org. And there's actually a ton of information regarding her disappearance, the search efforts, the campaigns that they've done, some campaigns that they've had. Just to give you a little tidbit, they released a blue ribbon campaign, which is the blue ribbon that was featured on some of the photos that you can see, if you just Google Maura Murray and see it on the website, that there was a blue ribbon on the tree that her father had put there. There's also the Engage with Empathy campaign, and this kind of relates back to content creators, podcasters, true crime creators, enthusiasts, whatever you want to call it. They need to engage with empathy when it comes to true crime victims in, certain cases, because we really don't know what happened. We want to show compassion to her if she did leave voluntarily and give her that space, but we also need to treat it with empathy for the family and the loved ones for her family and all the families in true crime. There was also some billboards. I know that once a year, on her birthday, May 4th, they do an annual workout because she loved to get out there and work out. So I feel like that's just awesome for volunteers and family to join and whatnot. There's just so much information regarding her. Just please, please, please check out the website. Once again, it is mauramurraymissing.org. There's just a ton of information, and me just going over the website, there's so much, but just looking over the website, it really shows how much her family is really, really involved in trying to find her and really keep her name alive and keep this case active and ongoing to try and find her. So that is all that I have for today's episode of True Crime. I hope you guys got a lot of information. I really encourage you guys to check out the website regarding Maura Murray's disappearance and her family's efforts to keep this active and ongoing. When I was researching this case, it was a lot of information just being thrown every which way, especially the theories. It was really interesting to see what people thought might have happened. There was a lot of online forums and blogs, websites, Facebook, for example, it has a ton of stuff as to what may have happened. So I encourage you guys to check it out. I encourage you guys to keep her name alive. If you really like this episode, please feel free to like, follow, and subscribe. It really does help me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, social media. And I really, really appreciate you guys joining me for another True Crime episode. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us today, and stay curious. I will see you guys next week.